Hello and welcome back. In the previous video, we talked about core built-in modules that Node.js provides to us when we download the language. We're going to continue on talking about core built-in modules, and more specifically, we're going to talk about a module called the HTTP module that allows us to essentially request resources across a network, whether that's a local area network or a wide area network. But we're going to dive more into understanding some of the different properties and some of the different methods. So routing is a core concept that is essential in understanding how a web application receives and sends information over a network. Routing defines the way in which the client requests are handled by the application endpoints. Let me just show you a quick example of what I'm referring to here. So let me first navigate here. I'm going to log out. All right. So here's npmjs.com's home web page. So right now, if we were to put a / here after npmjs.com, that takes us to the root of that folder directory for this application. And that there's a function behind that that actually returns the view that we see here. Now, if we were to go to products here, now pay attention to the URL bar here. So if we go to products, that routes us to the products page. And behind this route is a function that gets triggered that runs some logic. It could run some logic, but ultimately it returns the contents of the products page, which is everything that we see here. And there's many different types of routes that are built into this application. So if we were to click on, let's say for instance, status, that'll take us to another route or another path that will trigger a function to run and return the view for the status page. We can also pass information to the function that's behind each route by using this question mark and then passing certain endpoints in. And we'll talk more about that later on. But essentially, that's an example of routing. In Node.js, we can use the core built-in module HTTP or HTTPS to request and receive resources across a network. So Nodejs.dev is a really good resource that we're going to become familiar with in terms of how to, we're going to do is we're going to actually create our own server and then build our own routing system from core, from the built-in the HTTP built-in module. So let's go ahead and pull up our editor and begin to take a stab at building out, creating a server and creating some routes. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a side-by-side here. So I'm going to just window control here and first press here. And I'm going to have my window open, my editor. What I've done here is I created a folder here called http_app. I created a file called server.js, and this is where my code is going to go within the server.js file. Let's click on this node.js.dev, and you'll see that I've already put in line 1 is our require statement. And we talked about this require statement in the previous video. This allows us to bring in or have available some of the different properties and methods that are given to us by Node.js, and it makes it available to this script server.js file. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to begin to use this HTTP module. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a variable. My variable is going to be called server, and I'll say HTTP. I'm going to use a method here called create server. And the reason why I need to create a server is so that I can actually do request and response across the network. Within my create server function, I'm going to pass in another function as an argument that's going to define my request and response object. This may look a little odd here. It's all about the syntax, make sure you get the syntax right. And you'll see this is where all my code is going to go. So if we were to scroll down here, you'll see a little bit more information about the create server function. And you'll see this is kind of what I'm doing here. So if you want to just go ahead and copy it from here, feel free to do that. And you'll see that it's going to handle every single request that I make. The server is going to handle every single request that I make over across the network. But before we actually move forward here, let's just talk a little about the request and the response object and some of the things that we can actually request and respond to over or across the network. So let's jump back to our slideshow here. So the request and response object allows us to request and respond with specific information over the network. In this demonstration, I will make use of the URL and the method property to determine what way we need to respond back to the client over the network. So here's two of the different, here's the request object, and then here's the response object, and here's some of the various properties that you can utilize for the request object, and then here's some of the various properties you can use for the response object. So for the request object, I'm going to make use of this URL property. So I'm going to have some decision-making logic. I'm going to use an if statement, and I'll say request.url. And I'll say if the request is equal to, and this is going to be building my first route, I'm going to say about, and I'm also going to use some and logic here and say if the method is equal to get, I'm going to respond a certain way. And so whenever somebody makes put in this particular file path to come to my application, the about route, we're going to run some logic in this block of code. So within my block of code here, I'm going to respond a certain way. I'm going to say res.write. Now let's respond back and say this is the about page. And then if they don't do the about page, what will be left over is going to be the else. So I have a dual alternative here in terms of decision making logic. And then I'm going to say res.write, and we could just say home page. And I'm also going to use another method here. I'll say res.end. Same thing here. I can add more routes here. I can say else if, say req.url. This is equal to, let's say, contact. And I do the same thing here if the request method is equal to get. I could put post here as well, but the method in terms of which it travels across the network is going to be a get request, and then my brackets. I'm going to respond a certain way. So whenever somebody goes to contact route, I'll respond and say, right, this is the contact page. All right, I'm also going to add in my res.in, and I'll save this, and pretty much everything is good to go. I have my routes, my about, my contact, and then whatever, if I don't enter about or contact, it's going to default to my else branch, which is going to just basically serve up the home page information. So here, what I'm going to do is start up my server. I'm going to go Control tilde, and I'm going to make sure that I'm in my HTTP_app folder, and I'm going to say node and then put in the name of the file server.js. That's going to start up my server. And if I were to go to localhost and I navigate to the port 8080 and I hit enter, and I go to 8080 because that's the port I defined here, you'll see that it takes me to the home page. And this is because I'm at the else branch. There is no route that I'm putting in. And just like in my npm.js.org, if I put in a route, it's gonna take me to a particular, it's gonna run some code here, and it's gonna respond a certain way. So let's go ahead and test it out. So if I say /about, that's gonna say, hey, reply back with this is a about page, and that's what's happening here. And then if I were to go to contact, that's going to respond back with a contact page. Now, one thing I didn't mention here is this rest.end. You see that I put that here. And basically, that ends the response so that it concludes that it basically tells the server that, hey, we're done responding, so you can respond the way you want, and we're done with that request or that response. And so we need to put that so that we can end or tell our server to stop responding. So anyway, that's a simple example of using the core built-in HTTP module to build a server as well as to do some basic routing. In the next video, I'm going to extend this a little bit further and add in some additional modules. I'm going to use the file system module, and I'm going to add some HTML into this example here. Some pages. I'm going to reply back with some HTML code versus just some text. So stay tuned.